I think we have everyone in who was in the waiting room. Linda, you want to start?
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the District 19 Town Hall, Legislative Town Hall. This is thinking a little bit past November 3rd. The team is going to talk tonight about what their legislative priorities are when the legislature reconvenes early next year. This is the first district to do this. So great. Welcome to 2021 and the 2021 session. Thank you for being here tonight. And I just wanted to say a few words about the election coming up. Just to remind everybody that today is the last day to request a mail-in ballot. And so once that passes, you can't request a mail-in ballot after today. However, the drop boxes are open, you can vote. And then early voting starts on Monday. So early in-person voting starts on Monday. And that will go on until through November 3rd. So I hope everybody has a plan to vote, and that your family has a plan to vote. And also I want to thank everybody for all of their enthusiasm, their volunteering, all of the help that they've been giving us and giving the Democratic Party during this very, very important election season. I feel very optimistic that we're going to have a good night on November 3rd and that we're going to smash this guy and get our country back on track. So thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for the discussion. Thanks to the District 19 team for everything that you do. And I'm going to turn over now to Delegate Bonnie Colson.
Thank you very much, Linda. Thanks for being here. Thanks for helping us to convene this town hall. We really appreciate your support, especially the technical support in Michael Tardif. He'll be our grand producer behind the scenes. And I just want to say welcome to everyone. And we have a very busy agenda tonight. So I'm going to ask if, Michael, you can put that first, that slide up with the agenda. It's slide number 2. Just to give you a sense of what all we're going to be covering tonight. Obviously it's Delegate Bonnie Carlson welcoming you. So a little bit of change because Ben will have a little role later. And we're going to be talking about information on voting procedures. There have been a number of questions we've all received. And I know many of you have already voted, but some people haven't. And so there may still be questions out there. So we have someone coming to talk to us about that. We are going to hear a little bit about what's going on with the COVID-19 virus now and how the county is responding to it. We've got, and then as Linda referred to, what are the hot topics in the 2021 session, and what is your D19 team going to be focused on in this upcoming session? And then some attractions, meetings, groups that you may be interested in helping to be engaged and understand what's going on. So with that, I am saying, I am Bonnie Cullison. I am serving in my 3rd term in the House of Delegates, and I'm very grateful to be able to serve you. And my colleagues are just going to say hello.
So hello, I'm Delegate Charlotte Crutchfield, and happy to see everybody here tonight. Thank you for coming.
Good evening, everyone. This is Delegate Vaughn Stewart, and I'm also excited to see some of your faces, some of your names, but I'm excited about getting into it this evening.
Oh, you're on
Unmute yourself, Senator.
Oops.
That was the most important thing I had to say all night. So, and with that, I just want to say hi. I'm Ben Kramer. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. Thanks to you all for being here to join us, take some time out of your busy schedules. It's an honor for me to be in my 14th year now representing District 19 in Annapolis. And you've got a great team of hardworking folks with Delegate Bonnie Cullison as our veteran, and then Delegate Charlotte Crutchfield, Delegate Vaughn Stewart, a lot of talent representing this district. And it is my pleasure now to introduce one of our guests this evening. He is a member of the Montgomery County Board of Elections. He has been serving in that capacity forever. In fact, he and I were Cub Scouts together when he was first appointed to the board. So we've got a lot of knowledge and someone who can answer the questions you might have. So with that, my welcome to David Naiman. And David, thank you so much for being here, buddy.
Thank you very much. Whoops. Okay, thank you very much, Senator Kramer and Delegate Cullison and Delegate Stewart and Delegate Crutchfield. It is indeed an honor to be here with all of you. It may feel like I've been on the board forever. It's actually been since 2011, but I do feel like I've learned a few things since then. This is kind of like coming home for me. I grew up in District 19. I spent essentially the entire 20th century portion of my life in District 19. My mother still lives in Forest Knolls. My mother-in-law and father-in-law live in Leisure World. My sister and brother-in-law live in the neighborhood across from Kennedy High School, whose name I keep forgetting. So anyway, I'm very happy to be here with all of you. In my day job, when I'm not dealing with the Board of Elections, I'm a government lawyer. So you'll have to excuse me if I begin with some disclaimers and caveats. I am the secretary of the board, but I'm here just representing myself this evening. I'm not here on behalf of the board. That means I can say what I want. I plan to go through a few things and then we'll be happy to answer questions. I'm also happy to answer questions in the chat. I will do my best to answer everything that you, any questions that you have. I've been on the board since 2011, so I do know a bit, but this year is really like no other year we've had before. So please bear with me if I don't have the answers to every question, because sometimes we're trying to figure out how the normal rules apply to this very abnormal year. A bit about our local board. We have 5 voting members and 2 substitute members who are the alternates. By state law, the majority of the board, the side that has the 3 votes out of the 5, are the members of the same political party as the governor. The minority of the board, the side that has 2 votes, are the other party. So the president and vice president are with the majority, and the secretary is the only officer with the minority, and I'm the secretary. Now, we're the minority on the board, but county voters are the opposite. The board's so-called majority party has 16% of county voters, while our minority on the board represents 60% of county voters. So members of our board are appointed by the governor upon recommendation of the local Democratic and Republican Party committees. It is subject to confirmation by the Senate. So thank you, Senator Kramer, for your support in that. The job is nonpartisan, but you get the job by recommendation from partisans. I'm in my 3rd 4-year term, so that means I was appointed first by Governor O'Malley and since appointed twice by Governor Hogan. So that gives you a sense of some of the dynamics. In Maryland, the State Board of Elections, which also has a 3-2 majority in favor of the governor's party, they run the show. They make the decisions that local boards are required to carry out. So if you ask me why something is done a certain way, I may say the state made us do that. I also may say I'm in the minority on the board, but on most issues, it's truly nonpartisan or bipartisan. Every now and then I may blame state law and suggest to our legislators that we could make some changes. The biggest news this week is that, as Linda mentioned, voter registration is over and the deadline to apply for mail-in ballots is today. That does not apply if you've already applied for a mail-in ballot and you haven't received it yet, or for some other reason you need to get a reissued ballot, like you make a mistake on your ballot, for example. That can still happen after the deadline. But if you are applying for the first time for a mail-in ballot, you have to do it tonight. Some people have already started receiving emails from the state if they already submitted their ballot. The subject line says, "We have your voted ballot." I got mine 8 days after dropping my ballot in a drop box. That does not mean that it took 8 days for the ballot to get from the drop box. I use the one at the conference center, but it's the same everywhere. It doesn't mean that it actually took 8 days for it to get to the Board of Elections office in Gaithersburg. That time, the ballot only shows up as received after it's been processed. And the processing includes making sure that it arrives on time, which is not an issue before the election, making sure that the oath is signed, making sure that the ballot otherwise is ready to be processed. And then it has to be essentially the barcode on the envelope has to be scanned. And so they are not quite up to date on the scanning. It should be less than 8 days now, although the pace will probably pick up. The pace of votes coming in will probably pick up. The easiest and safest way to vote this year is by mail-in ballot. It's a bit of a misnomer because you don't need to mail it in. It's a ballot that is sent to you either by US mail or you can get it on the internet. I'll talk about that in a second. I highly recommend getting it by US mail. You vote it, you sign the oath on the envelope. Please, please, please do not sign your ballot. Under state law, this is where I'm addressing the legislators among others. Under state law, if you put an identifying mark on your ballot, we are required to throw it out. So if you just sign and date your ballot, we threw out 4 ballots like that today. Today was the first day we actually considered ballots as to whether they were going to be accepted or not. And we are required by law, if you sign the ballot, not the envelope, the ballot, if you sign your ballot, we have to throw it out. If you don't sign the envelope, we also have to throw it out, but you get a chance. Our staff tries to contact you and say, hey, you didn't sign the oath. Would you like an opportunity to do that? And you're given an opportunity to do that. You don't even have to do it by election day. You have to do it by 10 days after the election, although I wouldn't suggest waiting. And I really wouldn't suggest not signing the oath. It will save yourself a lot of trouble. Anyway, you put it in the return envelope. You can either drop it into a mailbox or you can drop it into a drop box. There will eventually be drop boxes at every Montgomery County high school. I know that there are already drop boxes. There's already a drop box at Montgomery Blair and at Wheaton, and I would have to look at the list to consult as to which ones are open when. All of the early voting sites have drop boxes that are already there. There's 11 early voting sites around the county. So there are a number of different options for drop boxes. If you still would like to request a mail-in ballot, the fastest way to do that is to do it online. It's a little more complicated than it should be. It feels like you're registering to vote. You may end up getting a voter notification card, even though you're already registered to vote, but it is the fastest way to get it mailed to you, short of visiting our office. If you use the paper form instead of the online form, it may take a little bit longer. Web delivery ballots sound better than they are. The web delivery ballot means that you're sent a link. You have to have a username and password. You go to that link. You can download your ballot. You print it on your paper. You send it in your envelope. You have to sign the oath on a separate piece of paper and enclose it. You have to figure out where to send it, which is to our post office box, or you can drop it in a drop box. But it does require a lot more work on your part, and then it also requires more work on our part, because we then have to copy it, hand copy it. You've used the 21st century technology to get your ballot by web delivery, and then we use an 18th century technology to copy it by hand onto ballot paper. Teams of 2 do that copying so that Democrat and Republican, and So, you know, it is double checked. When we had, in 2018, we had a recount in the county executive primary, you may recall, and we did not find any duplicating errors. But you can rest assured that it takes a very long time. And there's one thing that makes it harder this year than in past years, which is that in an effort to have better data for the election, we have different ballot styles for every precinct. And that's so that we can have precinct results, even though people can vote you know, in a lot of different ways in a lot of different places. As a result, when we duplicate those ballots, we have to be really careful to make sure that we have exactly the right ballot style. Ordinarily, in a presidential election year, there are very few ballot styles because basically there aren't that many offices on the ballot. In any event, if you do the web delivery, it does have that additional process, and it may take longer for it to be recorded as received. If you vote in person, whether it's at early voting or on election day, you will need a mask. You will not be allowed into the building without a mask. For people who refuse masks, they will be offered one. And if people refuse the one that's offered, we will not prevent them from voting, but we will not allow them to vote in the building. They'll have to vote outside. There are a lot of health measures that have been implemented, and we've been in consultation with the health department. Everyone will have masks. There will be hand sanitizer. Try not to get the hand sanitizer on your ballot because it will not be good for scanning the ballot. There'll be plexiglass shields, just like they have at Costco if you've been there. So there will be a number of different things done. I believe that we're going to have souvenir pens so that you don't have to reuse somebody else's pen. But I would urge you, if you are going to vote in person, consider going to early voting and not going on the first day. And I will tell you, in the past, remember, the early voting schedule this year is different than it's been in the past. In the past, the early voting schedule has been from Thursday to Thursday. So it would start 2 Thursdays before the election day, and then it would end 1 Thursday before election day. This year is different. This year, it's going Monday to Monday, with the last day of early voting being the day before election day. So what we're going to have is we're going to have 11 early voting centers open from this coming Monday to the following Monday. And then we're going to have, in addition to that, 25 high schools, 3 rec centers, the Nancy Dasick Center in North Potomac, the White Oak Rec Center, and the third one, it might be the Conference Center. I know the Conference Center has an election day site, but anyway, there'll be that many more places on election day. But there are a lot of people who, for whatever reason, like the idea of voting on election day, and that's certainly fine. You know, we're going to be ready for people to vote on election day. But if you would rather spend less time, consider alternatives. Usually the busiest time in early voting is the first 2 hours and the last 2 hours. This year, I would say the whole first day, you know, we should expect that there will be, you know, a fair number of people who will be waiting in line, anxious to vote, anxious to get it over with, et cetera. I don't know whether the last 2 hours of early voting, which will be the night before election day, will have the same dynamic as we usually have on the last 2 hours of early voting. I think it's more likely that that will be the dynamic on the last 2 hours on election day, which will be probably the busiest time of all. I would really urge you to consider alternatives to avoid the health issues with crowds and to avoid, you know, problems of time, you know, et cetera. That was all that I had in mind as far as my presentation. I have not been able to follow the chat while I've been talking,
So David, I'd be happy to read some of the questions to you.
that would be great, and
Okay.
I will do my best to answer them.
I think that you answered this, but if you would just remind us, James Corbett asked, he turned in his web delivered ballot to the same Dropbox that his spouse did, and they got theirs notification it was received, and he did not. So I think explain why his web delivered ballot was treated differently, and there may be a longer time.
Yes, I am. Since I got that one in advance, I am checking on the status of his ballot to see what the story is, if there's more to the story than that. But I personally, among others, have been really pushing to get more ballots received, recorded, so that voters don't request second ballots who don't need to because they're already in our office. And in order to do that, they have to take a limited number of people off of other tasks. And I think one of the tasks that they were taken off of was ballot duplication, because it takes a lot of time. We want to make sure that as many people who voted know that their vote was received, so that they can, A, so I can help their mental health, and B, so that they don't request more, call us to ask where their ballot is, request more ballots, et cetera.
Thanks. Cecilia Plant asks, when do they start counting the ballots?
It depends on your definition of count. And I'm sorry if that sounds like a very lawyerly answer, but we've already started to open some of the ballots. That started on October 6th, in terms of checking to make sure they have signatures, checking to seeing whether there's any issues for the board to consider, like the 4 that I told you about that people had signed their ballot, and like the beginning process. The actual running them through the scanner that counts them will begin, I believe, later this week. I don't remember exactly. I don't remember exactly which day. Basically, the same staff that prepares us for early voting runs the scanners to run the ballots, so that they have to finish with preparing for early voting, and then they run the scanners. None of those results will be released before the polls close on election day. So when you, I don't know if the person who asked about counting was interested in knowing when can they watch us count. You can start watching us count now. It's available, it's not terribly exciting, but it's available both on webcam and in person if you sign up in advance for a limited number of people. I'm quite sure that if you do it for an hour or two, you will have seen enough. If you want to see the ballots being scanned, it's approximately like watching someone make a Xerox copy on a very high-speed copier, but that possibility is also available. But if you want to know what the results are, you're going to have to wait till the polls close on election day, which is scheduled to be at 8 o'clock. But sometimes when there are issues at the polls and the polls anywhere in the state, if the closing time for polls anywhere in the state gets extended, there's a good chance that our results will not be released until those polls close as well.
Will there be any notifications after the notification that the ballot was received? Or do you just get that one notification?
You get that one notification. If you vote a provisional ballot, which we haven't talked about, but if you vote a provisional ballot, you can get notification as to whether your ballot was accepted in part, or rejected. But for your mail-in ballot, the notice that it's been received is your last notice. And let me answer a question you haven't asked, but that a lot of people do. What if I received my absentee ballot and then I decided that I wanted to go to the polls? Well, first I would ask you, why would you want to do that? If you want to go to the polls, if you just like the atmosphere at the polls and you like to feel like you're doing something with your community, I would strongly urge you to go to the polls and drop your mail-in ballot into the drop box at the polls. That way you avoid having to wait in line, you avoid everything else. If you try to vote in person after you've requested an absentee ballot, you will vote a provisional ballot. You will not vote the regular way that otherwise you would vote at early voting or in person. That is true whether or not you bring us the ballot that was mailed to you. If you requested an absentee ballot, because if you requested an absentee ballot, you can always request another one. And basically, if you vote an absentee ballot and you vote at the polls, I should say, I'm calling it an absentee ballot. It's called a mail-in ballot now. If you vote a mail-in ballot, that's the ballot that will be counted. And your provisional ballot will not be. If you don't vote your mail-in ballot, let's say you requested your mail-in ballot, you go to the polls, you vote provisionally, and you shred your mail-in ballot, and no one votes your mail-in ballot, then your provisional ballot will be counted. Every ballot gets counted. We don't only count ballots if the election is closed. We count ballots no matter what. But they have to meet the standards, obviously, to be counted.
Great. I would call people's attention to some links in the chat that talk about where you can request the ballot. I'm thinking that you can still request it up until midnight, David.
I believe that's correct.
Okay. And where the drop boxes are, a lot of good resources in the chat.
Yes, let me give you one more, which is that for the drop boxes, you can actually, if you send a text to 77788, that's 3 7s and 2 8s. Okay, 77788. If you text box and your zip code, it will give you the nearest drop boxes. So that's box, zip code, and you send that to 77788. You'll get a text back with the nearest drop boxes. We have similar texting that's available for early vote centers and also for election day vote centers. And I should also have added that you are also able to, sorry, I have to turn off my phone here. You also are able to get the wait times at the early voting centers and at the election day voting centers if you use our texting system. Also, it'll be available on our website.
Rachel Hickson asks, how do we volunteer to count ballots?
I believe that it's too late for that. If you wanted to count ballots, you have to be an election judge. And if you haven't already gone through election judge training, I think it is too late for that. In the future, I would say volunteer to be an election judge. We always need election judges. And then indicate your willingness to help with that. But I don't think it is possible to do now.
Okay.
I do see the question about how do we know that your ballot is being duplicated accurately and honestly. In my experience, first of all, I've had no reason to distrust the volunteer staff, both our staff and the volunteers who work on this. There are 2 people who look at it, one from each party, and they presumably are not only a check on each other for partisan reasons, but they are a quality check on each other. And the reason why I mentioned the recount from 2018 is because that was our best opportunity to check our work. I mean, it was a countywide recount. And we did not find any duplication errors. We also had a District 16 recount in the same election, but it's not as impressive to not find it in one district. Although obviously if we didn't find it countywide, we didn't find it in one district either. I think people pay a lot of attention to it. Essentially, one person reads out the names. And that's why, let's just say that I knew all of your all's names before I knew you all. To the extent I didn't know you before you ran for office, because your names got called out many, many, many times. But one person calls out names, the other person marks, and then the other person checks it. I mean, I think it's checked pretty thoroughly.
You talked about voters, this is from Carol Edwards. You talked about voters who signed their ballot, not the envelope.
Correct.
Are those voters notified or no, they're just discarded?
Unfortunately, they are not, although we voted today maybe I wouldn't say voted. We all agreed today that we want them to be sent a letter after the election notifying them so that they don't make the same mistake next time. And the state actually has made the rules slightly better than they were for the primary. In the primary, if you made an error and you initialed your correction, we were required to throw it out. Now they're saying that if we think that that was the intention, that we can, that we can accept that. Part of the problem is that it's hard to get into the heads of the people who sign their name on their ballots. And I think most of us believe that people aren't signing their name because they're trying to let you know who they voted for. That's what the law was originally designed for. It's so that I can go to the polls and I can tell Ben Kramer that I voted for him, and he can, I can send him a picture, I signed my ballot, et cetera. Of course, in the 21st century, I can still send him a picture without signing my ballot. So it seems like it's kind of a silly, a silly rule. But I think that people are so worried about making sure their ballot counts that they, we're all trained, those of us in the legal profession especially, signatures help to validate things, right? You never think of a signature as invalidating something, but apparently for ballots, the signature will invalidate it. So, so they do not get a chance to cure that mistake, unfortunately. But that's why it's actually in the sample ballot, because I made sure I put it there myself. It says sign the envelope, not the ballot. And I tell that to to anyone who will listen. Sign the envelope, not the ballot.
Okay. Christine Tetrault said she dropped her ballot off at Leisure World on October 5th. It's not recorded yet. She should, is there a way she should find out or follow up on that?
Has she already gone to the state website to see whether it says ballot received?
She doesn't say, but
because basically, part of my concern is the email that you only get the email from the state board if you gave them your email address, and the email from the state board. Unfortunately, the return address does not say State Board of Elections. I believe the word absentee is in the address somewhere, but it's it's not immediately obvious. But there is a link, and I'm sure that I can put it up, but Michael Tardif can probably do it faster than I can. But the state's website can tell you whether your ballot was received. If it was not, and if you deposited it at Leisure World on October the 5th, then I would like to follow up, on that, because that's roughly the time that I voted mine, and that mine wasn't at Leisure World, but even so, that shouldn't make a difference. Oh, I will ask, when you voted at Leisure World, was it by web delivery or was it by mail-in ballot? Because if it was by web delivery, all bets are off as to how long it takes. If it was by mail-in ballot, yeah, it should have been done by now. And I'm happy to follow up. And Bonnie or any of you, if you could give me a list of the ones to follow up on when we're done, I'm happy to try and look into those. Ordinarily, I am counseling patients, but if you've waited 2 weeks and you've already dropped it off and you haven't gotten your received and it wasn't a web delivered ballot, I do want to follow up and see what the story is.
We'll keep track of that. Thank you.
Mhm.
Roger asked about Mid-County Rec Center as an early voting and same day voting site. The answer is yes, right?
Yes, the answer is yes. Mid-County is just like it has always been. Well, not always, but just like it's been for many years, is an early voting site. And you can do same day registration thanks to the legislature, not only for early voting, also on election day. So, so anyone who has not registered, when I said that we were past the, when I said that we were we were past the voter registration deadline, I really should have added a caveat there, and that is that you are still able to do same-day registration at early voting or on election day. I also, while I'm thinking of it, I want to give a plug for, I was happy to be able to help in the effort to make sure that there was a drop box at Leisure World. I know that Senator Kramer played a role in that. I was, let's just say that you won't see anything in public that says that I helped, and that was designed to make it easier for you all. And you'll notice that it happened. So anyway, I was very happy to help with that. I really don't understand, quite frankly, why Leisure World didn't warrant a larger drop box. It has one of the small drop boxes. It's 3 precincts. And if I were king, which unfortunately I'm not even in the majority, let alone king, Leisure World would have gotten a larger drop box. But it does seem to be working. You know, I know people who have voted there and said that the ballot was received. I will find out about the example that you have of the one that may have taken some extra time.
David, I'm going to have to ask you to stop here, but I know that you're going to be responding to questions that are in the chat. And,
I am indeed.
And we'll watch for folks who say that they haven't been able to track their ballots and let you know who they are.
Okay.
And if you want to provide contact information, they might be able to contact you directly, might be a little more efficient. But Dr. Gales from the County Health Department is on a very tight timeline, and I
Excellent.
understand he is here now. So I would want to thank you very much, David, for your time.
Sure.
And I see Dr. Gales is here. Thank you so much for being here to help us understand what's going on now with the COVID-19 virus and the county's response and what we need to do to stay safe. So I turn it over to Dr. Gales.
Sure. Thank you, Delegate Cullison, and to all the other delegates on the call. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all. And thank you for accommodating the schedule. It's a little bit crazy. I teach on Tuesdays as well as play in a tennis league, and everything's happening within 7 to 10 o'clock. So happy to be here and happy to answer any questions that you all may have. I just wanted to say, I think that the first thing is to acknowledge the tremendous work of everyone on the public health services team, health and human services, and across county government, as well as many non-government agencies. And a huge thank you to all of the residents of Montgomery County, because you have adhered to the guidelines and guidance that we put forward. And that has helped us make a tremendous dent in the numbers of cases that we've seen. And we know it's hard and everybody's fatigued and tired. So thank you for sticking with us and sticking to the guidelines and guidance. It is going to become even more important as we move forward, because unfortunately, as many of you all have probably seen over the last several weeks, we have seen increases in cases across the country. I think today, 42 of 50 states have seen increases in cases over the last week. We have seen increases in our numbers here in Montgomery County. They haven't been super pronounced, but they have been steady increases. And so we're continuing to follow those trends. And, you know, we're looking at a host of measures. We're going to be rolling out a more simplified, it's not the right word, but I think a more distilled version of our dashboard for folks to follow along at home. We continue to emphasize the numbers such as our cases per 100,000 residents. We have seen an increase from that. In August, we had dropped to, I think, a low of 6.1 cases per 100,000 residents. This morning, we were at an average of 10.5. Our test positivity remains stable as we are testing more folks. And I heard Leisure World, we approved I think there's going to be testing at Leisure World tomorrow or later on this week to be able to test residents there as a part of the county apparatus. So we're testing more people, but we also are finding more cases. And we're paying close attention in particular to how the age trends go. In July and August, we were seeing a higher percentage of new cases pop up in our younger residents. That gave us pause as the conversations about reopening schools were happening. And in the last several weeks, though, we've started to see an increase in the percentage of cases in our older populations, those 40 and up. And that takes on added significance is because that is, as we've talked about before, typically a population that we would consider to be more vulnerable in terms of more likely to have more complications related to a COVID diagnosis. We continue to follow our hospitalization numbers. Our numbers are holding okay here in the Montgomery County so far, although there has been an increase in COVID-related hospitalizations in other areas of the state. We continue to work very closely with our hospital partners. And, you know, fortunately, we put a lot of time and effort in our surge planning during the first phase of COVID. I won't say first or second phase, but during the earlier stages of the pandemic. And we still have a lot of those playbooks in place should we need to utilize those if cases increase. So we're going to be, we want to just level set folks' expectations and make sure they understand that we're looking at all these trends to guide our decisions in terms of if we need to move forward in terms of reopening things, if the numbers allow, or conversely, if the numbers continue in the trend where they are in terms of increasing, if we have to walk back some of those provisions. So that's where we stand right now as a county. We continue to move forward. We continue to work with our partners in the National Capital Region, as well as our partners across the state. I'd be happy to answer any questions you all have, and thank you again for the opportunity to be with you all this evening.
I am not seeing any questions right now. I know one question I think we saw earlier was, when do you think the libraries will open?
Well, that is a great question. I do know that we have been working with the Director of Libraries around how to, safely handle books and other materials. And in terms of developing strategies around how to reopen safely related to capacity limits and those kinds of things. So I don't think there is a definitive answer just yet, but I do know that they're working diligently to make sure that those provisions are in place to do so.
Okay. Ira Unger is asking, when can you get oral rather than nasal COVID tests, and what's the current turnaround time? I understand that right time medical centers still require several days.
Yeah, so as far as so across the county, whether you're talking about the healthcare enterprise as well as the county sponsored, not county sponsored, but the county run testing apparatus. In some of those places, you can get oral tests. Now, we were utilizing a saliva-based test throughout most of the summer. We had to pivot and change our lab relationship, and we are currently using anterior nares testing, which is just the front of the nose, not going all the way back to the posterior chamber. Now, that said, we have formed a partnership with a new lab that does have an oropharyngeal swab and saliva-based collection mechanism. Their saliva-based mechanism requires a smaller amount of spit, for lack of a better term, in comparison to the one that we were using before. And we're hoping to bring those online within the next week or so. We recognize that having diversity of testing mechanisms, collection mechanisms, is important to be able to meet the different needs of our population. And in addition to that, we're continuing to work and explore relationships with companies around rapid testing and those types of mechanisms to be able to offer more broadly to those within the community. And turnaround time, right now the turnaround time for the anterior nares swabs, the company that we're using, is within 48 hours. And the new laboratory that we would be using, who has the provisions for the saliva-based and the oral-based collection mechanism, their turnaround time has been promised to be within 24 to 48 hours as well.
Great. From Roger, that he's wondering if the zip code 20906 is still one of the top spots in Maryland, in the county and in Maryland.
I confess I don't have the data in front of me, but I do know that, within the jurisdiction, we continue to focus on those areas, and 20906 is one of them. Hence why we're working to try to increase testing access to residents within that area, whether it's the Leisure World or other places. We've been working with our colleagues at MCPS around identifying how we could potentially utilize some of the school spaces to offer additional testing opportunities, particularly in the election. I know that a large part of the conversation will talk about election, but some of the election sites were some of the places that we have been using for testing for a long period of time, and we're happy. Voting is a critical, crucial exercise, and so we're happy to share those spaces in this time to do that. So we're continuing to explore how we increase those testing opportunities. We've tried to shift where we put our pop-up testing to areas based upon where we see cases pop up in those zip codes. For example, we've seen a number of cases pop up in the Rockville area, and so we've had a couple of testing sites specific to that area over the last week and a half or so to help meet that need.
Great, thanks. Where does the county get the information it uses to make decisions around the guidelines and precautions?
Many different sources. If I showed you my inbox of all the surveillance reports that I read, in fact, the lecture for the class that I teach, today's topic was epidemiologic influences on policy. And I was sharing with him all of the different resources that we read and reports to inform our decisions. So we look at a host of data. We look at our local data that is mined and put together by our surveillance and epidemiology team to look for trends. They also identify, we have members on our team, part of their dedicated job is to go out and look through the literature in terms of finding out best practices to help advise what we're doing. We also look at the state data. We get a number of reports from them on a daily basis in terms of surveillance, how we stack up in terms of test positivity, how many folks we've tested, how many cases we have. We also get a chance to see where other jurisdictions stand as well. We get reports related to contact tracing to help us identify in those cases we're finding what types of activities and venues they're associated with. We get performance ones. We also, we look at the federal information in terms of, reports as well to guide those decisions and determinations. So needless to say, it makes for interesting evening reading because that's what I typically do before going to bed is kind of catch up at the end of the day to say what happened today so that we can be better informed as we move forward. And so one of the strategies that I want to emphasize is that it's tough because no one has the right answers. This is new stuff. But what I will commit to you is that we are committed to finding out information as quickly as we can. And if there is a new strategy or new data to inform what we're doing, we try to make sure that we pivot quickly once we have a full sense of the comprehensive data to make sure that it's right, it's accurate. We use that data quickly to, continue to change the guidelines we have in place or, make the necessary adjustments to keep people safe.
Dr. Gales, I know that you are tight on time, but if I can ask one more question and then just remind folks that we're going to be recording your questions and we can try to get back to you with responses after this meeting. But a question that's coming up now is how have we prepared for the potential for a surge in COVID-19 and flu cases? Is the county taking special steps in the instance of that kind of convergence?
So the short answer is yes, and the long answer is yes as well. So in the short term time frame, we're encouraging as many folks as possible to get their flu vaccine, their flu shots this year. It's incredibly important to do that anyway, but it takes on added significance because a number of reasons. The first reason is we know that for example, 2 years ago when we were hit really hard by the flu, we saw a lot of people hospitalized as a result. And so as you can imagine, if our hospital system is stretched very thinly, accommodating and taking care of flu patients, it doesn't leave a lot of room for potential COVID cases coming into the hospital in general, but certainly if there is a surge in cases. The other complicating factor with the flu is when we look at, for example, contact tracing, particularly we're talking about schools or businesses, particularly in schools, we have to treat COVID-like illnesses as if they are a COVID case until we get a negative result. And so when that happens, and though schools are required to report both types of illnesses, if it's a confirmed case or if it's just a COVID-like illness, that could provide interruptions in terms of school schedules, in terms of having to quarantine kids or, shut down schools or classrooms until lab results are found to confirm or deny whether or not that case is a real COVID case and take further action. Also, as a result, we have a pretty aggressive campaign in terms of encouraging folks to get vaccinated. We also have been encouraging folks to utilize their primary care provider if they have access to one, the different commercial sites that are available for vaccines, as well as we have a limited supply from the county that we are rolling out to folks. And we have a number of vaccine events that we will be announcing shortly to make provisions for residents who don't have access in other areas to be able to get that. So that's the strategy around the flu. As it relates to surge capacity, again, I want to applaud our healthcare provider network in Montgomery County. It's phenomenal. We have been working closely, or we work very closely with our hospital leadership in the earlier stages of the pandemic around surge planning to make sure that they had adequate personal protective equipment, ventilators, and they also spent a lot of time in their respective institutions coming up with strategic plans around how do we surge space and increase capacity to meet those needs. Now, they haven't thrown away those playbooks. They still have them. And in fact, we have had some conversations about how we could potentially create space for, convalescent patients to free up even more inpatient space should we use it. So if there is a surge, I'm hoping it won't be, but if there is a surge in cases, I feel confident that we will be able to meet the needs of our residents in terms of hospital capacity and space. And certainly that is contingent upon also making sure that flu does not have a significant impact on our jurisdiction as we've seen in previous years.
Thank you very much. So basically, parents need to know that if their child is showing any signs of not feeling well, keep them home once we start in person again, and that anything that looks like an illness is going to be treated like the virus. Is that what we're hearing?
That is correct. So by the state guidelines, schools are required to report COVID-like symptoms, and they have major criteria, minor criteria, but major criteria: fever, cough, sneezing, basic things that look a lot like a lot of stuff. So, because this is flu season, it's RSV season, it's allergies for those of us who have it too. So there's lots of things that could mimic those symptoms. And so again, we say, if you're not feeling well, it's best to stay at home, whether it's a kid or an adult, in terms of coming into contact with others, to minimize, potential transmission until certainly you know what it is that's causing your particular symptoms.
Okay. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Gales, for coming and spending some time with us tonight. And for folks who didn't get their questions answered, we will get back to you after this. And please know that the Montgomery County website is just filled with information about things, ways to get tested, resources that folks have, so please go to that website if you have questions and need things. So thank you, Dr. Gales. We're going to move on now to something we are affectionately referring to as hot topics. Each of us serves on a different committee in the state legislature. So, and each of us has a set of issues that are particularly meaningful and that we are particularly passionate about. So, and that we've worked on for over a number of years. So we're going to take a little time for each of us to talk about what we think is going to be the hot topics in the 2021 session. And we're going to begin with Senator Ben Cramer.
Thank you for that, Bonnie. I think I'm unmuted this time. Although those pearls of wisdom, I'm sorry, were lost on everyone when I started out and I was muted. Again, my thanks for everybody being here. My thanks to the good folks at the Democratic Central Committee for making the town hall come together. We very much appreciate that. My thanks to Delegate Cullison for all her work in that endeavor as well. And as I had mentioned, District 19 has a great team working on their behalf in Annapolis. We each have committees that have different areas of interest within government. And I think that adds a lot to what it is we bring to the table in Annapolis, because we do have far-reaching impacts on a wide array of issues. My office, as well as my colleagues from District 19, has been overwhelmed during the pandemic with lots of folks who are in desperate need of help, particularly with regard to their unemployment benefits. There has been a real breakdown, and quite frankly, I don't blame the secretary or the division. They are working very hard. I do fault Governor Hogan, who had slashed this agency by more than a third of the folks who were working there before the pandemic, and has been trying to play catch up ever since. And unfortunately, it hasn't been working out well. And there are a lot of folks who've been trying very hard to get their benefits. And those of us in District 19 and across the legislature have been really working, under difficult circumstances to try to get these folks their benefits. And it's not a luxury. We're talking people who need food, who need rent, who need to be able to pick up the goods they need for their children. It's been a very busy time for all of us. Within the committee that I work on, which is the Finance Committee, we have a lot of interesting subject matter, including healthcare, health insurance, which I won't get into because my committee shares that with Delegate Cullison's committee, Health and Government Operations, and I'm confident she's going to want to discuss some of those issues. Within the Finance Committee, though, we also work on energy and public utilities issues, banking, and actually on a personal note with regard to banking, I will be working on some consumer protection initiatives in that realm. For those of you who are unaware of it, and it's particularly become an issue during the pandemic, the regulations guarding how your money in the bank is protected when it's stolen by hackers is all in the bank's favor. So in many instances, the banks can walk away without any liability, even if you don't bank electronically, even if you don't use the internet to do your banking. If the bank is hacked and your money is stolen from the bank, the regulations that govern the bank are minimal, if existing at all. And the banks can simply say, we're really sorry you lost your savings, your nest egg, but we're not going to cover it. So I will be introducing legislation in that realm in the upcoming session. The banks need to step up to the plate. There's certainly no reason for them to invest in the necessary protections if there's nothing that regulates their having to cover those losses. I was speaking with the president of the Senate yesterday. An important piece of legislation that I worked on with a lot of folks from the leisure world community last session was to create within the Attorney General's office a financial exploitation unit that would be strictly dedicated to working on protecting our most vulnerable from exploitation. And to my amazement, Governor Hogan vetoed that bill when it passed successfully through both the Senate and the House. So in my conversation with the Senate president yesterday, he made it clear to me that that bill will be up for a veto override, and I'm confident we'll move forward with it. And, disgracefully, during this pandemic is when we are seeing our most vulnerable preyed upon by the con artists and the scammers. and Governor Hogan vetoed this common sense legislation to create this division within the Attorney General's office. One other thing that is very timely that I will be again reintroducing, I've been working on this for years, that's to create permanent vote by mail. We learned from our primary election that when done properly, and that was under very difficult circumstances, our State Board of Elections was given 2 months to put together our first universal efforts at vote by mail. And there were glitches, but overwhelmingly it went very nicely. And we had record voting participation, particularly from some of our minority communities in the state that had not historically voted in the numbers that we saw. So I think a lot of my colleagues in the legislature have caught on to the notion that this is a way to increase voter participation, increase access to voting. So I'm looking forward to reintroducing that legislation and making headway. And then just briefly, I will also be working on some significant environmental issues, as well as one of my favorites, and that's animal welfare concerns. I think it said the way we treat animals says a lot about who we are as human beings. And there are some areas where we don't do a very good job of that. So with that, thank you all again very much. I appreciate your being here this evening. Please don't hesitate to reach out to my office or any of my District 19 colleagues should you have any concerns, issues, or things you want to talk about. Very often we can guide folks that may have an issue that's federal government or county government, but through our state offices are able to get you the answers and the help you need. So again, thank you very much. And thanks to the folks who were here to help us this evening. My friend David Naiman, it's nice to know that he's taking pictures of the ballot to send to me to show that he did in fact vote for me. Thank you for that, David. And with that, everybody have a good evening.
Except for the fact that I don't live in your district, so it would be illegal for me to vote for you.
I want you to know that's why I really appreciate it. Everybody stay healthy and stay well.
Thank you, Senator. Delegate Charlotte Crutchfield.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for being here, our wonderful District 19 folks. I mean, I haven't seen you in a while, and it's wonderful to see your names and your faces. I also want to thank David and also, of course, Dr. Gales, our special guest. We really appreciate you all being here. And most importantly, the Central Committee for just helping us make this all happen. So again, I'm Delegate Charlotte Crutchfield, and I serve on the Judiciary Committee in the House of Delegates. So I'm on the fun committee because, believe it or not, we're going to have a lot of fun this coming session. I also serve as the chair of a subcommittee, which is the Subcommittee on Juvenile Law. So getting back to the real thing, which is the Judiciary Committee, there is going to be a lot going on in that committee regarding police accountability, transparency, and just simply reform. And so I think that based on a work group that actually the Speaker of the House put together on that very subject, and there have been recommendations that have come out from that group, that we are probably going to be concentrating heavily on the repeal of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. We will probably also be working hard on the Maryland Public Information Act and expanding that to include those things that are sustainable and unsustainable as far as actually being able to provide and get information on individual police officers and any kind of wrongful conduct that they participate in. The other big thing will also be probably getting some serious guidance on use of force. So I would say those are the big three items that are going to be coming through the Judiciary Committee. And you've also probably seen those as well with the most recent hearings that were held in the judicial proceedings committee, which is on the Senate side. So I think working together, there's going to be some really, really great reform that's going to take place in the state of Maryland. So as far as I go personally, I'm going to be dealing with some juvenile law issues. My pet right now is a bill on repealing, or at least eliminating, I'll put it, maybe that's a better way to put it, on a theory that's called the felony murder theory as it deals with juveniles. The other big area that I really have a real concern about, and I will continue to fight for, and that's for equity of women prisoners, making sure that things are done equitably, and in particular in the pre-release unit, which is the fact that simply when women are coming out of prison, there's nowhere where they can actually go and prepare themselves to actually come out and have meaningful lives after incarceration. So those are kind of the big areas that I'm going to be working on. And I just welcome any questions that you all may have about what I'm doing and what we're going to be doing specifically in the Judiciary Committee. So thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Crutchfield. Just so you know, we'll be taking questions and responding to some of your pre-sent in questions after the four of us have presented. So now we're going to go with Delegate Vaughn Stewart.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you all again for joining us this evening. This is exciting to see everyone. I am Vaughn Stewart. I am really honored to serve you in Annapolis, and it's really my pleasure to work with Senator Kramer and Delegates Cullison and Crutchfield. I really echo Senator Kramer's comments from earlier about the unemployment system. I mean, it's just proven to be wholly dysfunctional, and I know that all four of us have spent a large percentage of our time over the summer trying to get those benefits to people in a timely way. The reality is Maryland has been the worst state in the country at quickly and efficiently getting unemployment benefits to people. It's just kind of a core function of government. And unfortunately, the Hogan administration and the Department of Labor have just completely fallen flat on their face. So it's been heart-wrenching. You know, folks have lost their car. They've had to move out of their house. I mean, they have had to choose between food and medicine, and we're hearing all these stories. So that said, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of the four of us if you or someone you know or love is having trouble accessing their benefits, because we can certainly try to help you, and we've been doing that. But it's a really tough situation. So in Annapolis, I serve on the Environment and Transportation Committee, which also has jurisdiction over housing and ethics. And those are generally the four issues that I focus the most on: environment, transportation, housing, and ethics. Last session, I was the primary sponsor for 8 bills that either passed the House or would have passed the House if we had not had a historically shortened session. It was the first time since the Civil War, as I'm sure many of you know, that the Maryland General Assembly adjourned early, obviously due to the pandemic. And the 2 of my bills, one had to do with tightening ethics rules, and one had to do with textbook affordability for college students. But the hottest issue in my committee this year, for the first time, really, is going to be housing, unquestionably. I'm sure a lot of you are aware that nearly 500,000 Marylanders right now cannot afford rent. And a lot of those folks have back rent that they haven't paid to their landlords, which means in a lot of cases, smaller landlords are unable to cover their mortgages. And it's just sort of a looming crisis. We've been managing to kick the can down the road a little bit with 2 different so-called moratoria, eviction moratoria, one at the federal level and one at the state level. But it's really an impending crisis of potential displacement and homelessness. And so I've been working a lot with Speaker Jones and the leadership in the General Assembly throughout the spring, summer, and fall to just basically try to find creative ways to keep folks in their homes. And I'll be working on several bills in the upcoming session to not only assist tenants who are struggling to pay their rent and who have not been able to pay it, and also to construct more affordable housing, because the reality is this is not merely a landlord-tenant issue, it's also just a housing supply issue, and it's an issue that predates the crisis. The pandemic has exacerbated a lot of these inequity issues that we had, but a lot of them were pre-existing crises in our state. For example, on the housing front, 15% of Marylanders were housing insecure before the pandemic struck, and obviously that number has gone way up. Secondly, is the environment. I serve on the environment subcommittee, and since I've been in Annapolis, I focused a lot of time on climate change, on the health of the Chesapeake Bay, and on sustainable agriculture. And so for the upcoming session, I'll be working on a couple of bills related to water quality and public health. And I also actually have a bill to keep farm workers safe during the pandemic, both because they deserve respect in the workplace, just like any other worker does, and because our state's food supply chain really depends on their health. On the ethics front, I serve on the ethics subcommittee, and ethics reform lately, at least, has maybe been my number one focus. And so I'm working on 2 more ethics bills for the upcoming session, and they basically deal with greater transparency for public officials' private interests. And they also focus on leveling the advocacy playing field between corporate lobbyists and everyone else. On the transportation front, pedestrian safety has been a big focus of mine, and I'll be continuing that push. I'm sure a lot of you have noticed that since the pandemic started, we've seen less traffic on the roads, and therefore we've seen more drivers speeding. And so I'm working on some legislation with some folks in District 19, actually some activists to stiffen penalties for drivers who exceed the speed limit by a lot, 30 miles per hour or more, or drive recklessly, and also those who participate in speed racing contests, which, as crazy as it sounds, are on the rise in District 19 and across Montgomery County since the pandemic hit. And then finally, I'm planning to introduce 3, I think, particularly noteworthy bills outside of my committee. 2 of them will actually go to Charlotte's committee. One is designed to combat hate crimes, and that bill actually passed out of the Senate last year, but we couldn't get it through the House in time. One that's noteworthy that I think is actually going to pass this year, maybe my kind of most buzzy bill, is going to ban ICE detention centers for Maryland. I think we're probably all aware of the atrocities that have been committed by ICE, especially during the Trump administration. And I'm of the view that ICE really has no business in the state, and Maryland shouldn't be complicit in ICE's depravity. And so I'm very, very optimistic that along with my Senate my Senate cross-file, my Senate partner, Will Smith, that bill will pass in the upcoming session. And then finally, I've been working on a bill that'll go to Delegate Cullison's committee about long-term care insurance, because I know that it's been a perennial thorny issue that my colleagues here on the call tonight, as well as some of our predecessors in District 19 have worked on for a long time, but basically trying to limit these gargantuan premium increases that hit seniors who hold long-term care insurance policies year after year. So that's another issue I'm working on, and I'm happy to answer any questions or go into more detail about any of these issues. But again, it's an honor to serve you in Annapolis. I'm always available for ideas about bills or feedback on any of these issues or more. And I think that they're going to post my email address. But yeah, don't hesitate to reach out if I can help you out in any way.
Thank you very much, Delegate Stewart and Delegate Crutchfield and Senator Kramer. I'm going to back cleanup for a few minutes and say I want to just echo my colleagues and say I feel so grateful for the opportunity to be able to work with an amazing team of folks who are well respected in Annapolis, understand that we're bringing meaningful and substantive policy issues to the House and work hard to get them passed. So I am just, like I said, I'm grateful for the team, and I'm grateful for our constituents, because it is a pleasure and honor to serve you. So I serve, as been alluded to, on the Health and Government Operations Committee, which deals with all elements of health, and the government operations piece is primarily things like procurement, civil rights issues, etc. So I spent, since I'm chair of the Insurance and Pharmaceutical Subcommittee, I spent a lot of time working with the, all different kinds of, all the elements of the insurance industry. This is going to be a really critical year for us with respect to insurance, because we've learned a great deal in our experiences with the virus. And insurance carriers have actually had to be pretty flexible and pretty agile. But it's also a situation where they need to be guarded, and there needs to be a great deal of oversight, because while some things might be free, other things, for example, the COVID testing is free, you can get that through your insurance, but sometimes, it's like squeezing a balloon, and when it's free in one place, the balloon expands in the other place. So it's something that we as elected officials really need to pay close attention to. And so we're going to be looking at what happened to insurance over the last it'll be 10 months by the time we get into Annapolis. I will say that just as I've been working with the carriers since the pandemic began, they've been very responsive to the needs and have stepped up into places where we didn't necessarily anticipate. And one of those is telehealth. And the issues that surround telehealth are across a wide range of elements, because it has to do with the practitioners themselves in terms of what the services provide and how it's delivered and how it's monitored. And we had a briefing last week in my subcommittee and learned that some of the issues with telehealth are with practitioners from outside of Maryland who are not licensed to practice in Maryland. And so when the consumer is going and asking for reimbursement for that service, the insurance company is saying, I can't give that to you because that person is not licensed in the state. So that's just one example of the challenges. Who would have known, right? If you were going to DC to see a social worker who wasn't licensed in Maryland, that service might not be covered during the pandemic. So, we're going to be looking at different kinds of policies that we need to look for with respect to practitioners, but also with respect to telehealth itself. I mean, again, what are the platforms, and how is privacy guaranteed, and what do we need to do in terms of payment? Again, in the briefing, the issue was raised before March 17th. You could call your doctor and say, I've got this pain in my elbow. What should I do? Should I come in and have it x-rayed, or should I, what do you recommend? And, the doctor might say, put ice on it or put heat on it, and, try that first. And you didn't pay anything for that phone call. Within the pandemic, if you made that phone call, that's considered a televisit, and your insurance company would be billed for that. And if you had a copay with the insurance, then you were going to be charged for that phone call. So, a lot of things that we're going to be adjusting to. Those are the kinds of discussions we're going to be having in HTO around insurance. The other thing is pharmaceuticals. 2 years ago, we established the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. It is now up and running. The funding issue has not been resolved, except because we passed a funding bill, funding mechanism for it in the 2020 session, which would have required all of the insurance carriers and the pharmacy benefit managers and the pharmaceutical companies to contribute a very small amount, something like $700 or $1,000 a year to pay for this pharmaceutical board. That bill was vetoed unsuspectingly. We were all surprised. So that's something we're going to have to come back to. The board met yesterday. It was working on with Care First to try to figure out what's generating for the insurance carriers the highest cost for pharmaceuticals. So we've got a great deal of work to do there. For me personally, I think you all have heard me over the last couple of years how passionate I am about school-based health centers, because as an educator for 32 years, I see the impact that lack of access to good healthcare had on students, particularly those who were economically vulnerable. And school-based health centers are an incredible resource, but they're not being well used in our state. And they're sort of like the stepchildren of the Department of Education and the Department of Health. And so we've been working hard over the last few years to raise awareness and to raise the stature and to provide more resources so that we could expand them. And in the time of the pandemic, we have spent a lot of time trying to figure out how they should have been used instead of, and provide service when schools were closed down. These are fully functioning clinics within our schools. We have 13 of them in Montgomery County, 2 in District 19. And when the schools were closed down, those services were closed down. And there are those of us who believe that was premature and that we should have been able to have those resources available to those families in those communities because the clinic is there. So we're working with the agencies to figure out how we do this in the future within the same conditions and environment that we have now with COVID-19, but also should this ever happen again when we have to close schools down. So those are the kinds of things that I'm going to be working on this year. I would like to take a few questions and as many as we can in the next 10 minutes or so. And then we'll take the questions that we can't answer, both what you gave us in advance and what's on the chat, and try to get back to you with some responses electronically, in a later time. Maybe I can't promise you it'll be by the end of this week, but we can certainly shoot for sometime next week. So I see, I'm going to go back and forth between what's in the chat and what's on the page, and that were submitted, and see how many we can get through. So I'm telling my colleagues, if we want to get through more questions, our answers need to be succinct. Anyone want to talk about the veto overrides? Don't all jump at once.
Bonnie, I'm happy to jump in if you would like. I can share with everybody, because I had, as I was saying, this conversation with the Senate President yesterday. The Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate have yet to have a meeting of the minds as to what the strategy will be for veto overrides. There will be a significant number of them. Governor Hogan got veto happy at the end of last session. And again, there, a lot of this, there didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to, other than, I think he was, in that COVID lockdown, trying to find something to occupy himself. So there will be a significant number of veto overrides when we convene in January. But the strategy for it, and again, some of these do take strategy as far as how they're done, the timing of them. There are a couple that will be a little bit contentious and a challenge to cobble together the votes between the two chambers. But at this point in time, there really has not been a consensus between the presiding officers as to exactly how it'll happen and what the process will be.
Yeah, I guess I would just add that I hope people can consider this is a unique situation that we're in with respect to our economy, with respect to the health and well-being of our constituents. So while we are all very committed to the bills that were vetoed, there's a lot of thinking that has to go into what happens in this next session, and how focus is done. So a question that goes with that that we heard is from Leanne Peace is asking that, saying, considering the amount of legislation held over from the last session, how would you characterize the opportunities for the inclusion and passage of new legislation proposals?
I mean, I'm happy to still stay jump in on that if.
Okay, I'm going to unmute Charlotte and Vaughn pretty soon here.
Please feel free to jump in there, guys, if you want to. Yeah, there's a lot that was left on the table last session. I'm guessing that I probably had a dozen bills that came out of the Senate, went across the street to the House, and then suffered a COVID death over there because we shut down early for the virus. And the bills never, moved in the House chamber. So it will be somewhat challenging because, there will be a lot of legislators like myself reintroducing and having to start all over again from the beginning. Legislation that we came in with last session that, didn't get out because of the early termination of their having been there. But Charlotte, Vaughn, Bonnie, please feel free to jump on in.
Yeah, I was going to say the other thing to also think about is the factors of the possibility of a surge in COVID again, and what that could possibly do to us as well. I mean, it's not a given that we're going to go through an entire session. So, again, we just got to be prepared for and hope that we can get through whatever legislation we need to work on this time around.
Yeah. So a question from Justin B that came in is, what committee would marijuana legislation fall under? That's an easy one. It's health. Well, it's shared.
Might be both.
It's shared between Judiciary and the Health and Government Operations Committee, depending upon what the issue is. I know that
criminalization,
right?
Decriminalizing.
Decriminalization.
Yes, the decriminalization of marijuana would definitely come under.
It would come under Judiciary. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Now I remember.
It's okay.
Thank you, Justin. So we're going back over to the list of questions. I think we got, actually, some of them were answered by our guests. And I'm going to go down. One of the questions, let's see, sorry, what? How do we have plans, or what kinds of legislation would be needed to provide, I'm going to look to Delegate Stewart for this, more support for housing? And I know you spoke a little bit to it, but is there, are there state programs we should be looking at? And I know the county is looking at, has implemented one, but are there state programs as well?
Yeah, I saw that question. It's very interesting. Thank you for it. I mean, I think in terms of building more housing, in terms of constructing new housing, which I think absolutely must be done, in conjunction with preserving the existing affordable housing stock that we have. Basically, there are two components of it. One is that you can legalize different forms of housing in places where they're currently illegal. So, for example, in some places in Montgomery County and statewide that are actually pretty proximate to high frequency transit stops, be they high frequency buses or metro, apartments or even duplexes or triplexes are banned. I think that's a pretty disastrous policy, both from an affordable housing standpoint and also just a climate change standpoint, because we want there to be higher density of housing near transit nodes. And I had a bill last year actually to relax some of those zoning restrictions that passed. It was watered down past the House, but we couldn't get it through the Senate in time. And then the other thing that you can do to build more housing that I've also worked on is just create revenue streams so that the government can help fund more housing. The reality is it's just not profitable for developers a lot of times to build anything but high-end luxury market rate housing. And so if you want to have housing for people across the income spectrum, then taxpayers are going to have to foot that bill, especially because the federal government has shown a complete lack of willingness to help out in any way, especially in the last 4 years. So I have another bill that would basically change the real estate transfer taxes a little bit, so that folks who are buying multi-million-dollar properties pay a couple $100s more, and then that money would go into a fund to help us spend some more money on affordable housing. Because sadly, Maryland spends, when you look at sort of per capita spends some of the lowest dollar figures per year on affordable housing of any state in the country. So there's a lot we can do, and I'm happy to talk more. We could probably take up another 2 hours of just on this topic alone, but thanks for the question.
Delegate Stewart, I'm going to look to you again to start this, the response to the next question. Some folks are asking about the ballot questions, and
Sure.
Just a little bit about, what people are recommending, but also, the difference between county questions C and D.
Yeah, I can just run through all of them real fast, and then if people want to chime in with their own thoughts, but I can just chime in about what all the ballot questions say. There are 6 of them. I'll try to do it as quickly as possible. So ballot question number 1, this is a statewide ballot question. It would amend Maryland's constitution by empowering the General Assembly, including the 4 state legislators you're chatting with this evening, to shift budget spending priorities while maintaining the overall spending cap. So we still couldn't, deficit spend. We'd have to still have a balanced budget. But Maryland has the most powerful governor in the country with respect to budget authority. Right now, the legislature does not have the authority to move money around in the budget or add money to any particular items in the budget. We can only subtract from the governor's budget. And ballot question number 1, which I personally think is probably one of the biggest no-brainers on the ballot, would sort of right this wrong by empowering the Maryland legislature to be able to actually move money around and fund the kind of things that we all think should be funded. And that would basically put the General Assembly on par with the state legislature in every other state. Ballot question number 2 would legalize sports betting, and then the plan would be to dedicate that money to public education. And then moving on to the county questions, you have A through D. They're a little bit more complicated. Ballot question number A would shift the county's current inflation-linked cap on overall property tax receipts to an inflation-linked cap on property tax rates. This is something that the Montgomery County Council supports. Question B, which is a Robin Ficker proposal that I think would be disastrous, would lock in the current cap on inflation-linked property tax receipts. They would lock it in with no breaching rights for even a unanimous county council, which would essentially impose austerity on the county's budget at a time when we need to be helping folks out during the pandemic, and it would probably jeopardize our AAA bond rating, and honestly is one of the worst ideas I've heard. Montgomery County ballot question C would expand the current 9-member county council to 11 members by adding 2 district seats. And ballot question number D, or question D, not number, letter D, would shift the composition of the council by establishing 9 district seats, therefore abolishing the existing makeup, which is 5 district seats and 4 at-large seats. And so, I think these 2 are pretty easy to understand, and I think people have varying views on them. I voted for C, which the county council supports. I voted against D. My view is that question D, I think, comes from the right place, which is basically trying to provide more geographic representation for folks in the Up County, which is a goal I sympathize with, living in Durwood, being a proud Up County resident. But I think it goes about it in the wrong way personally. And obviously my colleagues are welcome to chime in, because I really enjoy the ability to vote for vote for and be represented by 5 members of the county council out of 9. I think that that's like a very great privilege. And I know that when it comes to addressing constituent concerns, it's really nice to be able to say, well, you tried to go to council member X. If you tried council member Y, they also represent you because they're at large or they're in your district. And it just gives you multiple choices with multiple different county council members who may have different interests or points of emphasis, just as we do in District 19. So I think that giving that up would be a big mistake. I think that reasonable minds can disagree about question C, but I like the idea of expanding the council and providing a couple of extra district seats, because I think it helps address the concerns undergirding question D. So those are my personal views and how I vote. I mean, on question 1, I think it's a no-brainer. Question 2 about sports betting, I think reasonable minds can probably disagree on that too. I think that that's kind of a personal decision about whether you like betting. I mean, I've heard from a lot of people that say they wish that we would fund, public education not through like a sin tax on betting. But at the same time, I think the other view is that a lot of other states have already legalized this, and we're sort of cross-subsidizing them by not capturing that low-hanging fruit revenue to be able to fund public schools. So, I think reasonable minds can disagree on that, but the Democratic caucus and the General Assembly has endorsed both question 1 and question 2. So with that, I'll shut up, and everyone can. These are obviously hot button issues. I'm sure folks. I know that the chat's been blowing up, and I'm sure other folks have views too.
Anybody else want to speak to it? Okay, we are at.
The chat's been blowing up because you gave such a great
Yeah.
explanation.
Yeah, it mostly just seems like, for anyone who hasn't seen the chat, just praise of me. Everyone's just saying,
Oh, yeah.
you are like extremely profound and articulate.
Second only to Senator Kramer's beard, but but we are at near our ending time, and we do have a little bit more information we'd like to pass along, so that you are aware of it. But please know that we will try to respond to your questions, and that you can contact us at any point, at any time, if you about any of the questions that you have here. And if we don't know the answer, I know all of us, are committed to finding them. So, we're happy to give our opinions, but we're also will work to find the answers to particular specific kinds of questions. So thank you all. Thank the four of us for, providing that information about the next session, answering a few questions. Charlotte, you want to talk to us about some opportunities that folks have?
Sure. So there are actually some subcommittee meetings that people may be interested in attending. There are 2 economic development meetings, and those are coming up. One is coming up this week, October 22nd, and it's at 10 a.m. And then there's an economic development meeting on November 10th at 11 a.m. And those are House subcommittee meetings, and maybe meetings that you really want to at least sit in and understand and hear what's going on. The other most important meeting for us will be our full delegation meetings. So there's a joint House and Senate priorities meeting, and that's November 12th at 7 p.m. Then there's a bill hearing on local bi-county bills, December 1st, and then another bill hearing on local bills on December 8th. So again, please join us for those hearings. In particular, like I said, the full delegation meeting, so you understand and know what your Montgomery County delegation is working on. And most importantly, you can be a part of that and understand what we're doing and make sure that we actually have your interests at heart.
And Vaughn, you want to speak a little bit about the session?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we touched on it a little bit. This session is going to be a really weird one, and they haven't worked out all the kinks. They haven't told us everything about how it's going to work, but we do know a few things that I wanted to share with everyone tonight. One is that the committee process, normally we spend 80-90% of our time in committee meetings. That process will be entirely virtual for the 2021 session. That means that all committee hearings, all subcommittee meetings, all voting sessions in the committee will all be done virtually. Probably a lot of us will actually still be here, at our houses while doing that, sometimes in Annapolis, sometimes at home. And I think that, this is going to be a challenge, that there are going to be definitely kinks to work out. There are going to be growing pains. It could mean that overall the General Assembly is less productive than normal, as was alluded to earlier. But I think that the silver lining here is that we'll probably have more opportunities for regular people to participate in the legislative process in Annapolis than maybe any other time in the state's history. Because instead of having to get out of work and make it down to Annapolis and sit down in the hearing room for hours and hours until your bill is up, and then, sit there and then drive all the way back, now you'll just be able to log on for 5 minutes from the comfort of your home and share your views and hear from your legislators. And so I think that while, there's going to be some challenges and some headaches for all of us getting used to this new system, I do think that in many ways it could be a benefit in terms of public access and transparency for your government. They're still working out the details of how you do that. We'll certainly keep you abreast as to how to sign up for committee meetings and how to do all that. They haven't totally figured out all the logistics yet. And that's the main thing we know. I think there probably will be some sort of in-person component that we will have to do to make sure we abide by the Constitution. But the important thing to note is that we're not going to have, closed doors, because of the power of Zoom and the power of the internet. Nothing's going to be sort of done in, smoke-filled secretive rooms. This is all going to be out in the open. And I think that will be a really big boon for the state.
Okay, as we've said a number of times this evening, and Michael, if you want to put the slide up with our contact information, we are all available to you when you have questions, when you have ideas, when you have thoughts. We can all be reached in our offices in Annapolis. And while there are not people in the building right now, they are, those phones are being monitored, our emails are being monitored, on a daily basis. So, we're trying to get back to folks as quickly as we can and, follow up with you. So we are still accessible. Senator Kramer, I have to ask you this question. Unmute. When will you be joining Twitter?
As long as I can avoid it, I will be doing so. But thank you for that question. And it's interesting because I was reading an article today from someone who said why I need to get off Twitter and I should have never gotten on. And I was laughing. And it was, yeah, that's all the same reason. That, I don't think people want to hear what's going through my head on a routine basis. So I think we're all better off for it.
Sorry to put you on the spot, Senator, but I thought it was an interesting question. We want to say thank you again to everyone who was here tonight. Again, it's so important that we be engaged in this very important time in our democracy. And we thank you, and we hope that you will be in touch. And with that, we are going to close the meeting. Thank you all.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Thank you.
All righty. Thanks, Michael.
Who's that? Melissa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, but I never seen any